Welcome back, guys, in the Sovereign Renaissance. In today's episode, we're going to be delving in the occult and esoteric knowledge. In today's episode, titled The Concept of the Sacrifice Triad. A single death is a tragedy, two is a warning, but the third is a mathematical certainty. In the darkest corners of occult mechanics, they don't call it a coincidence. They call it a tripod. Three specific funerals spaced just far enough apart to let the grief fester, acting as a structural pillar to anchor a predatory contract. If you look closely at the sudden tragedies tearing your family or organization apart, you'll realize you aren't living through a streak of bad luck. You are watching a geometric cage snapshot point by point until the debt is paid in full. In dark occult circles, high control groups, and certain esoteric traditions, the occurrence or deliberate orchestration of three deaths or funerals carries deep symbolic and structural significance. It really represents mere coincidence. Instead, it is viewed through the lens of ritual geometry, energetic transitions, and systemic consolidation. The triadic formula of manifestation. In standard Hermeticism, the number three represents the first geometric form, the triangle, and the completion of a cycle, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In occult mechanics, this formula is inverted or weaponized. Three successive deaths are often seen as a structural pillars required to fully manifest a specific intent or shift reality. The first death, the catalyst, it disrupts the, it disrupts the existing energetic field or dynamic. The second death, the anchor, it stabilizes the disruption, deepening the trauma or the shift. The third death, the lock or seal, it closes the gate, finalizing the transition and making the new energetic reality permanent. Threshold crossing and the third time lock. In many esoteric traditions, dictate that a pattern must occur three times to cross the threshold from the subjective to the objective. Once is anomaly, twice is a warning or an echo, thrice is a binding law. Within high control groups or dark lodge environments, a sequence of three funerals is sometimes interpreted as the ultimate cutting ties with a past epoch, a specific bloodline karma, or a defensive spiritual shield. It represents a total, irreversible severing. Energetic siphoning and systemic consolidation. In the study of negative aggregate mechanics, large bursts of emotional energy, particularly the grief, shock, and focus generated by a funeral, act as a massive energetic deposit. A sequence of three deaths creates a sustained loop of trauma and mourning. For a malignant leader or an occult entity thriving on control, this triple anchor of grief leaves the surrounding collective highly suggestible, energetically depleted, and completely dependent on the central authority figure for stability. It essentially bankrupts the emotional reserves of the group, allowing for absolute psychic consolidation. The concept of the sacrifice triad. In specific painful practices, the number three is tied to the concept of payment or balancing a contract. If a practitioner or an organization enters into an asymmetrical spiritual contract for power, protection, or wealth, the exit or renewal fee is historically mythologized as a triad. This is often this is often where the popular mundane superstition death comes in threes originates. In occult circles, however, it is not viewed as a mere superstition, but as a rigid mechanics of debt collection, where three specific pillars of a structure are taken to pay for the elevation of a hidden fourth. The sacrifice triad is one of the most sobering concepts in dark esoteric mechanics. While popular folklore observes that death comes in threes as a strange quirk of fate, dark lodge traditions and high control occult circles view it as a precise mathematical law of systemic debt and energetic exchange. When an individual or a collective enters into a contract for asymmetric power, protection, or influence, the universe or the specific egregore anchoring the contract demands a balancing of the scales. The balance is really paid in a single installment. It is paid in a triad. The geometry of the debt. Why 3? In occult geometry, a single point represents a position. 2 points create a line or a relationship, but it takes 3 points to create a plane, a fixed physical reality. When a heavy spiritual debt is called in, or when a massive shift in power is being anchored, a single sacrifice is structurally insufficient. A single death causes a temporary shockwave, but the system can naturally rebalance itself afterwards. A triad of deaths, however, form a geometric cage. By claiming three distinct points within a family structure, an organization, or a close knit group, the energetic architect completely collapses the old matrix, ensuring a new reality or debt is permanently locked into place. The structural roles within the triad. In a deliberate or contractually, contractually dictated triad, the three losses are rarely random in their timing or nature. They typically follow a specific functional sequence to maximize the extraction of energy and control. The catalyst, the first death. This loss is usually sudden, shocking, and highly disruptive. Its primary purpose is to smash the defensive psychic shields of the target or the group. It induces a state of raw vulnerability and cognitive dissonance. The anchor, the second death, occurring while targets are still reeling from the first. The second loss deepens the trauma and introduces a sense of dread or inevitability. It signals to the subconscious that this is no longer a coincidence. It is a pattern, the seal, the third and final. The final loss closes the loop. It is the ultimate payment that cements the contract or completes the destruction. of the old structure. Once the third funeral concludes, the energetic trap snaps shut, leaving the survivors completely depleted. The extraction of loose and systemic bankruptcy. From an energetic perspective, the sacrifice triad is an aggressive harvesting mechanism. In certain schools of thought, the intense emotional energy generated by prolonged grief, terror, and mourning is referred to as loosh. A single funeral generates a spike of this energy, whereas a triad of funerals creates a sustained, compounding resonance of despair. For high control leaders, malignant narcissists in positions of spiritual authority, or parasitic entities, this continuous loop of trauma acts as a massive power source. By keeping a group or a family line in a perpetual state of mourning, their personal sovereignty is entirely compromised. They become hyper suggestible, easily manipulated, and spiritually bankrupted, allowing the predatory structure above them to feast on the residual energy and consolidate absolute control. The illusion of choice. In these dark mechanics, the tragedy of the triad is that the architect often convinces the victims that the sacrifices are necessary for the greater good of the family or lodge, or that they are a cosmic punishment that can only be averted by deeper submission to the high control system. In reality, it is simply the rigid, cold operation of a predatory spiritual contract. So look closely at sudden tragedies shaking your circle. Count the caskets. If you already lost two, do not look for comfort. Do not pray for luck, because in the cold geometry of a dark occult contract, the architect is already picking out the third pillar. And as the trap begins to snap shut, you have to ask yourself one final question, and terrifying question. Are you the one left behind to mourn, or are you the final point on the triangle? If you liked today's video, please do like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, goodbye.